which Moses was the leader of the Hebrew people, which were worshipers of the moon at that time. If you go on the web and just type in moon god sin, it will have all kinds of information showing you about how the moon was a very important part of worship in the ancient world. And they will also tell you that Moses was a leader of a lunar cult. There's a lot of information about the moon cult and the moon god, Yahweh or Allah. Here is a classic example in the ancient world of the moon god Sin. The god himself his name was called Sin. And in the ancient world, Ai was a mountain in the times of ancient Egypt. Ai was a mountain, and so we have this moon god Sin in the mountain, Ai, and put it together and becomes Sinai. So Mount Sinai is actually the moon god Sin in the mountain of Sinai. Well, Mount Sinai today is felt to be the center for and the really foundation for the Jewish religion as it began to spread throughout the Middle East. Mount Sinai was where God met with Moses. God met with his people at Mount Sinai. But Mount Sinai is actually Sin Ai. Now it's interesting that today in most of the Western world, the word synagogue is spelled S-Y-N-A. But in Israel, it's S-I-N-A. Because Israel realizes that the original word was S-I-N, not S-Y-N, and because of the moon god Sin. Synagogue basically means temple of the moon, because Sin was the moon god. I think it's important to realize that there's a difference in the way it's spelled, one way in Israel and a different way in the rest of the world. Here is just one of many reference works. This is by an Andrew Kay from the Southern Methodist University. His article is Traces of the Worship of the Moon God Sin Among the Early Israelites. The Jewish tradition talks about the combination of the heavenly moon as a part of the most important part of the Jewish worship at that time. There are many symbols and emblems and paintings showing Moses in relation to the moon. And so here is pictures of a priest lighting a fire to signal a new moon. Here you will see an illustration of the Israelites and their worship of the moon, the prayer to the new moon. And below you will see sanctification of the new moon. This is from Amsterdam as far back as 1723, showing the importance still in the worship of Israel for the new moon, or for the moon. Above you will see the new moon etching from a book back in 1748 showing the Jews celebrating the new moon. Today, the new moon is still very important around the world to many cultures. And here we have a picture of Egypt and the Sinai. And down toward the bottom of the Sinai, there was a huge mountain range. And so here we see a better picture where Mount Sinai is referred to in the area of the wilderness of Sin. And Sin, of course, is the moon god. Sin is originally the moon god of the Arabic world. Allah and Sin and Moses with Yahweh, it all had to do with the worship of the moon god Sin. For some reason, the ancient Arabic world placed a very high respect on the moon. It's probably based on some phenomena that the new moon caused, because the Arabic world and the ancient world in general realized that the moon has a huge effect on our bodies. It has an effect on our food supply, and it pulls the oceans of the world. And so the moon was very important to the ancient world. I mean, that is a whole study in itself, why the ancient Arabic world had such a reverence for the moon. They always used the moon to keep the track of days, because their days started at sundown, at 6 o'clock. Because why? Because that's when the moon comes out. while the Christians were worshiping and having their holidays and important times in their religion. On Sunday, they were worshiping worshiping the Son of God. The ancient Arabic world and the ancient Hebrews were under the influence of the moon god. The Christians, as you know, have a sun calendar, and their days start from sun to sun, while the Hebrews in the ancient Arabic world had a lunar calendar, which counts their days from sundown to sundown. The moon, as it comes up, and it was referred to as the lunar god who lived in the mountain, and the real Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai itself was understood to be a volcano, and this is why when Moses goes up into the Mount Sinai to get the new 10 Commandments from God, he is confronted by the mountain is on fire. And so anytime you have a mountain on fire, that happens if you have a volcano. And so Mount Sinai was known and is even today recognized as being probably connected to volcano worship also. And so this is why Moses goes up and he sees the mountain on fire and he talks to God. And the scriptures, even in the Old Testament, the Bible says that the ancient Hebrews were frightened when they would hear the thunder in the mountain, because they said thunder was a word we call thunder, but the ancient Hebrews said it was the voice of God. He's talking to them. And he had lightning, and that was trying to get their attention. So God was very angry and very upset with the Jewish people because it was like a mountain on fire. Well, of course, we're talking about a volcano. So Moses becomes important in volcano worship also. Here you will see Moses pictures. These are all pictures from Christian and Jewish publications showing Moses going up into the mountain, and it appears to be a volcano. Well, it's because it was a volcano. Here we have a Jewish publication showing the children of Israel running away when they hear God thundering in the mountain. It looks like a volcano. All of the pictures of Moses going up into the mountain to get the 10 Commandments always shows the mountain on fire. All right, so here we have Moses preparing to go up to the mountain to get the new 10 Commandments from God, and that appears to be a volcano. Here is a particular religious celebration. It's called the Feast of the Giving of the Law. And in the Hebrew reference works, you look up the celebration of the Feast of the Giving of the Law, and what do you see but a volcano? So the word volcano comes from a Latin volcano god called Vulcan, or Volcanus. It's derived from an old Cretan deity, Volcanus. Here is the old volcano god Vulcan. And it was always because the people were frightened to death at the thunder and the lightning that was caused by the volcano. And they thought it was God talking to them. And so then we talk about Prometheus, was another ancient god about the time, was also a volcano god who was worshipped and took him to Greece, while Yahweh was a volcano god who the worshippers took him back to Judah. And this is again why Moses encountered God in the burning bush, and it seems as not only the burning bush, the whole mountain was on fire. Yahweh was worshipped by the Jews as a volcano god and a lunar deity, and there's a lot of interesting connections with the ancient world religions that it's not that easy to explain how all of these pieces came together to form a particular religion. It says in one of the reference books, it says, yet the original Yahweh seems to have begun as a volcano god also. Mount Sinai, where Moses encountered him, was the seat of a Midianite god who had formerly dwelt in a volcano. Here we have Moses getting the law from God, and you'll see the lightning and the fire and the thunder and the lightning all around him. We go back to the book of Exodus where we read, and the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud, Now this is talking about the time when the Jews were leaving out of Egypt, and God was going to be with them as they went on their journey. And so it said that God went before the people by day in a pillar of cloud. He showed that he was with them by having a cloud follow them everywhere they went to lead the way out. And by night, he would have a pillar of fire to give them the indication that he was with them at night. They could see the fire. So they knew God was with them. In the daytime, it would be a pillar of cloud, and at night, it would be a pillar of fire. It goes on to say in 22, it says, and he took not away the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night from before the people, to let them know he was with them. Well, that's what you get in a volcano, is a pillar of cloud by day, right? A pillar of cloud by day does not necessarily mean God is there. It means it's a volcano. And then you have a pillar of fire by night, of course, a volcano. So we go on to read in different parts of the Old Testament Bible about Yahweh being a God of the fire and the pillar of fire, etc. Now here in Job 38 in the Old Testament, we read that in the footnotes, the storm, the clouds, God's tent. And so the ancients believed the clouds were a tent in which God lived when he was following them. So the clouds, God's tent, gathers as the thunder, the voice of Yahweh, roared. They descended, and God shoots the arrows of his lightning. Down in 37, it says his thunderbolts. God thunders wonderfully with his voice, showing that Yahweh in the Old Testament was just another volcano god who thunders with his voice. And of course, Zeus was also connected to the worship of Yahweh because he was also a god of lightning and thunder, the same as Yahweh. As a matter of fact, there's a whole story about the connection between Zeus and Jehovah, because today Zeus gives us our word for God, Dios in Latin. And so Dios is Latin as God. It's taken from the name of Zeus. And they even have a canal called the Suez Canal, which is Zeus spelled backwards. So Zeus was very important back in those ancient days too, as a volcano god. You can see how the ancient people would be frightened, thinking that God was in this holy mountain and the mountain's on fire. We keep in mind that in the Hebrew language, it says thunder is called kolath, or voices, for it's considered the voice of God. The Bible in the Old Testament uses a term for the voice of God, but it is actually the word for thunder. After it, a voice roared. He thundered with his voice of his excellency. Again, just showing that we were talking about a volcano god going all the way back into ancient Egypt. And Yahweh was also called Volcanos. He was a Vulcan god, the god of the Vulcans. Even today in Hawaii, the volcano goddess, the whole idea of connecting a god with a volcano has to do with the sexual reproduction of the human race. That's the fire of reproduction. And so it's the fire that gives life to the earth. That's where it actually came from. Today, the Jewish religion is not as dominated by the moon as it was maybe thousands of years ago. So ideas change from time to time. Here's another important part of the Moses story, is that Moses, we are told, when the Israelites were trying to get out of the area they were in, and God was with them, they didn't have the foods, and they were starving. And so they came to Moses and said, you told us to leave, and we're following you, but now we don't have any food to eat. Moses talks to God, and it is said that God gave to the Hebrew people a manna to eat. And it was spelled M-A-N-N-A, manna. And so it was the manna from heaven. God said, all right, I will give you food for the moment. You're not going to starve. God told Moses, tell the people to go out in the morning, early morning, And on the ground there will be little round white disc-shaped things, and to eat it, because this will be good for you. And so that will save you from starving. Manna is actually in Hebrew means, what is it? Because the people didn't know what it was. It was on the ground and it was good to eat, but they don't know what it is. And then the Bible goes on to say that it was small. Manna was small. It was round, flaky. It was white. It was obviously from heaven, because Moses said God gave it to them. And so here we have pictures of the Israelites under Moses' direction out in the morning picking the manna from heaven to eat. Even in the Bible it says, and when the dew, this is in Exodus talking about this time, and it says, and when the dew that lay on the ground was dried up in the morning, behold, on the face of the wilderness there lay a small round thing, as small as hoarfrost on the ground. And when the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, it is manna, for they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, this is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. We now know that what we were talking about was mushrooms. So we're talking about the ancient people of Israel were being fed by God mushrooms, the magic mushroom. And so you see the people of Israel on the grounds in the morning picking mushrooms. And we know now there's been a lot of books written about the magic mushroom as it's used in the religious rituals and in the Jewish culture and in the ancient cultures of the Middle East. A lot of people use mushrooms. Today, like James Arthur's famous book, Mushrooms and Mankind, The Mystery of Manna, Magic Mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms of the world, psychedelic sacraments of the mushroom. A lot of people do not know that the Hebrews were very interested in this manna from heaven and have kept the tradition. And today, mushroom and eating mushrooms is still being used today around the world. But what we're talking about actually is the magic mushroom, which is a psychedelic mushroom. Eating the mushroom, we are told, enhances your ability to understand things openly, opens your mind up so you can understand and see things and experience the spiritual and the metaphysical properties of life. Here is an article in Israel. It says Moses was high on drugs, Israeli researcher writes. There's been quite a few articles in Israel. Here's another one from an Israeli magazine or newspaper. Hebrew University researcher Moses was tripping out on Mount Sinai, showing that even in Israel they realized that Moses was not only the leader of a moon cult, he was also connected to a volcano god. And then also he was the one that was introducing the use of magic mushrooms to the Jewish community. You can actually see the connection with the so-called New Age movement today, and the progression of the same old, as I've said before. The more we change, the more we stay the same. Today we're talking about a new age that's coming, a new time, and a new law, and a new understanding of God. And what's part of that is magic mushrooms again, and natural phenomena. Moses was not the only one on mushrooms. We also see mushrooms going back even further back in time than the time of Moses. If you look today, you will see in the Vatican, Adam and Eve supposedly in the Garden of Eden with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Actually, in the Vatican, it shows the Adam and Eve at the mushroom, taking mushrooms. Here's another Christian fresco showing Amanita muscara as the tree of good and evil in the Garden of Eden. So according to the ancient Vatican records, Adam and Eve were not in the garden with the tree, as we've been told, but they actually show Adam and Eve eating mushrooms. And that was opening their mind to be against God and to do all kinds of things that they couldn't do before. So the magic mushroom has been around for a long time too. John Allegro was number 3 man in the translation of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And in it, his book called The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, which is a study of the nature and the origins of Christianity within the fertility cults of the ancient Near East, in which he shows that ancient Christians were on mushrooms also. The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross it's been a very famous book for a long time, and it opened up a whole new study in Christianity also about their use of the magic mushrooms. Because if you use the magic mushrooms, you'll talk to God all right. You'll have some psychedelic experiences, and Christians will call that, I talk with the Lord. No, it's just a psychedelic experience that mushrooms have on your mind. But we see this magic mushroom, which is Amanita muscaria. This particular one is very potent for giving the brain a whole new experience taking this. And so we see it used everywhere. Many religions in the Middle East, in India, and Africa, depend on the magic mushroom and the effect it gives in the human mind to put you into an altered state of consciousness. So, now there are many symbolisms connected to all of the stories coming out of the Old Testament about Moses. And one of the symbols that I think is interesting is the headdress that people and royalty and people in the Middle East use, which connects directly to the idea to Moses introducing the magic mushroom, because so many of the priests were priests of the mushroom. There have been many books written about the fact that they were called priests of the mushroom. They wore mushroom headdresses. Mushroom headdresses were actually rather prevalent in the ancient times. So Moses was involved in a lot of things, a lot of stuff in the Bible that Moses is involved with. We just don't understand the implications of it. Today, in the world of religion and government and secret societies, there's a very important facet to the connection between governments and religions by secret societies, and that is the use of the planet Saturn. Saturn is referred to in the ancient world as Lord of the Rings. Well, of course, he is the Lord of the Rings. And men were told to, when they get married, to get married before your Lord, and you wear a wedding ring. Circles and rings were used in different religious events. In order to show you the importance of the planet Saturn in religion, generally speaking, throughout the world, I think it would be appropriate to give you some ideas about the original Hebrew religion and where it came from, and then how it has progressed over the years until today. Saturn dominates the Hebrew religion. It also dominates many of the other religions of the world in the Middle East. Originally, there was ancient religion, but it wasn't Hebrew or Jewish. Going back to the Middle East, we find that it was probably more Egyptian than it was Jewish. But the Jewish people, or what we call the Jewish people back then, at that time, the dominating worship at the time in Egypt and the whole Middle East was the worship of the moon. And moon worship was very important. The Egyptians especially put a lot of importance on the worship of the moon. Well, the moon god, if you were in Egypt and you're looking east, in the middle of the Sinai desert is an enormously high mountain range. And so the people on the Egyptian side of the Sinai would look eastward, and every evening, about 6 o'clock, the moon would come up from the mountain. The moon became known as the old man of the mountain. And the moon name, the old man's name was Sin. Sin was the name of a moon god to the ancient world in the Middle East. And the mountain was Ai, so you put the two together, Sin and Ai, becomes Mount Sinai. Well, that's where Mount Sinai is said to be, is in the Sinai desert. And this is why the Hebrews today, as they did many hundreds of years ago, they have a lunar calendar based on the moon. They trace their beginnings of each day from sundown to sundown. Why? Because that's when the moon comes out, is from sundown to sundown. First of all was the moon. Later on, Jupiter comes into the picture in ancient Hebrew worship. Jupiter, because in the ancient world, Pater, P-A-T-A-R, or P-A-T-E-R. And in the Phoenician Canaanite language, it was a Piter, P-I-T-E-R. The ancient name for the Jews was I-U in the King's English, the old King's English, for the word Jew. It wasn't spelled J-E-W, it was spelled I-U or I-O-U. So I-U was Jew, and Pater was the father. So it became known as the father of the Jews was I-U Pater, where I's and J's are interchangeable. So now it becomes J-U Pater, or Jupiter. Jupiter now becomes very important in the Jewish religion, and then from the changing of the astrological age of Aries, from blowing the ram's horn to Pisces, you now move into the Christian age. Today we have, in the Vatican, we have a statue of Saint Peter. No, it's not Peter, it's Pater, Father God, Pater. And you put J-U in front of it, it becomes Jupater. That's at the beginning of the Christian dispensation. And now, within the last 500 years, 400 or 500 years, Jupiter has now been eclipsed and has kind of gone into quiet. And now the main planet today is Saturn. Saturn is referred to as the Lord of the Rings. And as we said, that Saturn is today actually the god of the Hebrews today. In the old Phoenician Canaanite language, you spell the name Saturn, S-H-A-B-B-A-T-H, Shabbat. And so if you're going to worship the planet Saturn, the Shabbat, you do it on something called the Sabbath. So when you hear in the Ten Commandments, remember to keep holy the Sabbath, Sabbath is the Phoenician name for the planet Saturn. Saturn, as a god, was always called the god of the black robe. Black is a very important color in both Judaism and the Catholic Church and Christianity because black represents Saturn. Saturn is the god who is a judge of all mankind. That's why judges in courtrooms wear a black robe. Shabbat also has another interpretation. Saturn is the seventh planet. He's also sometimes represented as the Grim Reaper, Father Time. Very interesting, all the little details about Saturn and its numbers applying to it and the colors and all of that. We get our idea about chronology from Saturn, so we have something called a calendar, chronia, the calendar. Saturn was Chronos in Greek. Another reason why Saturn was important is because Saturn was understood to be the inhibitor, one who holds you back in life. That's why when you are celebrating your God on the Sabbath, you do no work. Because the ancients said if Saturn is the inhibitor who holds us back, then we won't do anything. He doesn't have to hold us back. We'll just not do anything on Sabbath. The reason why that Saturn became known as the inhibitor, and because it circled Ancient man didn't know there were any other planets out past Saturn, so they assumed that he's the bottom line. He's the one that holds us together. Saturn is still important in Middle Eastern religions, Arabic religions. The Star of David is a six-pointed star. Well, a six-pointed star is actually referred to by the reference works as a hex, a hexagram. Hex simply means six, which incidentally, in the Bible, 6 is the number of a man. How do you spell six in Latin? It's sex, S-E-X. So 6 is a six-pointed star. And today the Jews call it the Star of David, but the encyclopedias will show you that a six-pointed star is a hex, and it will tell you that it was originally the star of Saturn. So in the ancient world, some priests would draw a circle on the ground and draw a triangle, and then they would put another triangle obverse going the other way, which makes it a six-pointed star, and then they would be able to step inside of the circle and into the star and cast a spell on you. And so the idea was that they put the hex on you. In 1977, NASA sent out the Voyager, and as that probe moved out into space, it passed over Saturn. And as it passed over Saturn, it happened to go close to the North Pole of Saturn. For some reason, on the North Pole of Saturn is a hexagram, a six-pointed hexagram on the North Pole of Saturn. Scientists cannot explain how there is a six-pointed star on the North Pole of Saturn, and what's even worse to try and explain is how come the Jews knew that Saturn was connected to 6 in a hexagram. Somehow or another the Jews knew that six-pointed star was somehow connected to Saturn. There was no way for us to know until 1977 when the space probe went across. NASA had to explain to us that it was simply a fluke. It was something that just happened, nothing to be concerned about. Then like 40 years later, when the Cassini craft goes out, that same hexagram is still there on Saturn. It wasn't just a little fluke. It's there on Saturn even today. In the motion picture Lord of the Rings, Sauron is portrayed as an evil eye. If you go to the South Pole of Saturn, you will see what as altogether looks like an eye, the all-seeing eye. However, if you think about the planet Saturn with its rings, if you turn the angle just right, now the rings look like two separate eyelids with the center circle as the eye. So there's a lot of mysticism connected to the planet Saturn, the Jewish religion, the Catholic Church and the Catholic religion. Even Islam today has a symbol of Saturn that is dominantly important to Islam. And it was a black square or a black cube. And the black cube represents the planet Saturn. Well, that's what Mecca is in Saudi Arabia, is a black cube, a black square. All over the world, large black cubes and architecture and churches and monasteries, huge black square cubes, just like Mecca. In the movie 2001, Space Odyssey, in the book, the original book on that gave birth to the movie, in the book it was the astronauts were going to the planet Saturn to find this black cube. There again is the black cube in the planet Saturn. Anyone who studies the dark arts, the dark sciences, or the world of the occult knows that Saturn is very important to the dark side of this world in relation to religion and occultism. Saturn is the inhibitor. It'll set you back and teach you a lesson. Saturn represented government, military, the police department, governmental agencies. The Saturnalia was the celebration in Rome for the planet Saturn. And it happened like 13 days before the 25th. So it was like 12 days before what we call today Christmas. But it was the 12 days before, and it was called Saturnalia because Saturn was in Rome considered to be the god of chaos. That was another thing he was known for. What the Romans did with worshiping Saturn, they actually had 12 days of chaos in which the kings would bow to slaves and prisoners were let loose and they would be in charge of their masters who put them in prison. There was alcohol and sex and drugs and whatever you wanted. In the Roman Empire, you're free to do whatever it is you want to do. And so if you are a slave, when Saturnalia comes, you can go to the house of your master and bring him out and make him bow down and kiss your feet. So the idea was it was a chaotic time in which all law was just thrown away. And now it was up to anybody, whatever it is you want, go out and get it and take it. Today we call it Christmas. In the Roman Empire, the Saturnalia. And then there was a Brumalia, which was based on the worship of Saturn too. A very important NASA scientist named Norman Berglund has written a book called The Ring Makers of Saturn. And in that book, Norman Berglund, the scientist, shows actual pictures taken of the rings of Saturn, and one in particular has some sort of a vehicle, space vehicle, that is creating another ring. And it's not quite finished. So there's a ring on this side, and there is some kind of a space vehicle creating the ring, and it's almost ready to connect the ring, but it's not quite. And so we got some beautiful pictures. And it's going to ultimately connect it together, and that'll be a new ring in Saturn. So we know that the rings are artificial. Somebody's made them. I was speaking up in a conference in San Francisco a few years ago. He came over to me, and I wasn't expecting that. And he said, "Jordan, I've come here to meet you. I want to talk with you in private." And so we went back into the back of the restaurant and sat there, and he says, "I'm here to tell you something. I've come here. After I talk to you, I'm going home." And he said, "But you've been talking about the planet Saturn. I wanted to show you some things about Saturn you don't know." And so he pulls out some pictures. He had some pictures and NASA pictures. So he said, "But what we do know is that it's inhabited." My question was, could the rings be like a dish for communication in deep space? Because we have television dishes, the big dishes. Maybe the rings could be some kind of a communication device that can send out or receive from extreme distances, hundreds of light years away, with this dish set up. And he said, "Well, that's interesting. I don't know, that much about that idea." Saturn is a very important planet that balances out the positions of other stars. Jupiter and Saturn dominate our solar system. They're so large. Saturn is important in not only its physical qualities of being able to exert energy fields and sounds, but it also goes back into ancient history, which makes it really interesting. How did the ancient peoples know so much about the planet Saturn and also associate Saturn, as they did, with dark mystical forces? Saturn is probably the dominant figure in dark religions today, in the occult world, metaphysics. Saturn plays a prominent part in all magical systems. As a matter of fact, in Germany today, there is a very powerful secret society called the Brotherhood of Saturn. The books written about them say they are probably the most important secret society on the face of the earth. They are connected behind the scenes to all kinds of powerful organizations, governments, secret societies. I think the darkness associated with the planet Saturn and the occult religions of the world has to do with some actual, in fact, influence that Saturn has on the human race that the Jewish people realized that we didn't realize. And they probably got the idea from other ancient cultures that also venerated the planet Saturn. I am convinced that the world we live in is being dominated by an extraterrestrial presence. And I think that extraterrestrial presence is the one who is feeding us our ideas about theology, religion, the occult world, governmental systems, churches, and somehow the older teachers were knowledgeable about planet Saturn. But David Icke has been talking about this too for a long time, that Saturn is a very important planet to the occult world. And it is, because if you do any research into occultism, secret societies, Freemasonry, you will find that Saturn dominates the whole subject. I think that we have been on this earth, we humans, the way we live today, we've been on this earth with other life forms, other higher and far more intelligent and creative life forms that we really haven't looked at very closely and haven't really thought much about it. But when you do that kind of research into the things which are found on the earth that we can't explain, pyramids on the floor of the ocean and great temples in the Pacific and in the Atlantic Ocean, and the pyramids of Egypt and all of the wondrous, beautiful structures of the ancient and prehistoric world, there are just too many indications that there's a higher civilization that has been on this earth than we are, far higher. They understood the universe far better than we do even today. And so the Aztec, Mayas, the Incas, the Toltec peoples, the Egyptians, Babylonians, Sumerians, all of these ancient cultures were far, far smarter than we are. We've been learning from them. Our numerical system comes from Babylon. Our understanding of our religions and the concepts in our religions come from Egypt, come from the Hindus, the ancient Hindus. So I am totally convinced, as many other researchers and writers on the subject, that we are not as wonderful as we think we are, but there were far more civilizations that were far more adept at science and taught us today. They taught us. I believe that we're being manipulated even today by what we call government and governmental officials. But if you look at the history going back 6,000 years, it seems as though there's always been an overshadowing intelligence behind our evolution and our destiny. Someone as smarter than we are has been guiding us. The idea that we have been created by a higher form of life, a higher civilization has created us. It implies that they, in creating us, have purposely not given us full potential, because you don't do that with a new experiment. You just bring it along little by little and guide it the way you want it to develop. And so we don't have the wherewithal, intellectually speaking, to break away from the masters who have created this earth and seem to feel that they own us and that they can control us. We don't really have the wherewithal. And I think the reason why is because knowledge is power. And if you don't understand some of this hidden knowledge and hidden history of who we are and how we've got here, if you don't understand that, you're never going to understand why we don't have the power that we could have if we joined together. Even in the biblical understanding of the creation of man, it says that God made man and woman in his image after his likeness. And so it tells us something about our Creator by looking at ourselves. Because if our Creator was like us and we are in that image and likeness, then there are many good people who are working to help the human family and help to educate and to protect, while there's many bad who want to just use us for slaves. So I think that there are good extraterrestrial life forms here who want to see us progress, but they also are aware that we should not become too smart, because if we become too smart and too clever, we may be presenting more trouble for everyone else out there in the universe, because we're already talking about going out to the stars and setting up new civilizations on other planets. But the extraterrestrials look at us and think, wait a minute, you're talking about coming out to the stars and setting up new civilizations like the one you've got on Earth today? I don't think so. With all the violence and pornography and drug addiction and murder and all the bad blood among peoples, and you're going to bring that out into the universe? You better think about that. I think the bottom line on this is that there are two sides to the story. There are some good extraterrestrials, aliens, and there are some who are evil. Same thing can be said for the human family. But that doesn't mean everyone's bad. It just means the ones who are bad are more vocal, and you see what they're doing. Because of the conditions that the world that we live in today exhibits, that there is a dark force in this world that tends to cause man heartache and tragedy and drug addiction and alcoholism. And I think, this is just my opinion, but I think that the reason why there is so much, drug addiction, alcoholism, the movement toward I and me and I want what I want, I think all of that is part of the frustration of the human family that realizes it's capable of so much more, but that the powers that be over us keep us down. They won't let you. If you're too smart, you're going to be in trouble. Government doesn't want you too smart unless you're working for government. I think when we were being created with some kind of an inborn or hardwired complex in us that we want to look to something higher. We want to look to a father. We want to have a mother and father, and they take care of us, and they make all the decisions for us so we can just go out and play and have fun as children because we have the authorities who take care of us. And so I think that stays with the human race, because all we are today, all the adults on the earth today are just grown-up children. Most adults think like children. They don't have an education of a really well-informed adult. And so I think that's the problem, is that our makers, and whoever they were, want to keep us ignorant, because that way they can control you better. I mean, when you start getting too smart, you start asking the wrong kind of questions. And now you're going to be in trouble, because now you, as an investigative reporter, you're starting to look at things going on in this world that you're not supposed to talk about. The best way to control people is to keep them frightened and confused. Because if the humanity, even the Bible said basically that if the human race were to ever put down its arms and stop fighting each other and join together and use their minds and use their spirits, that they would be invincible, that they would be an incredible civilization on this earth of extraordinarily brilliant creatures, human beings. And so to keep that from happening, because if we get too smart, our creators or those who think that they own us and control us will have bigger problems trying to control us. So they keep us ignorant and ill-informed and unread and fighting among ourselves like children. That keeps us out of their way, so that they don't do what we do. They don't fight each other. So I think that there is something to the idea that there is an extraterrestrial presence in our solar system, and it has been communicating with certain humans on the earth, giving them knowledge. And so the knowledge is now out there that Saturn is very important to the extraterrestrial world. This dollar bill has value because it is based on your physical body. Your flesh and blood body backs up the authority of this money. If you're an American, this money is backed up by your body. Now let me show you how. When you look at the front of the dollar bill, you will see on each side are serial numbers for this particular dollar bill, are serial numbers. If you look on the back of your Social Security card, you will see the numbers on the bottom. The numbers on the bottom, usually in red, represent your blood on the New York Stock Exchange. It represents your physical body. That's why the numbers are in red, representing your blood. Now, when you take the numbers on the Social Security card and put it next to the serial numbers on the dollar bill, you will see it's the same sequence of numbers and letters. And so what it's actually telling you is that there's like whatever the amount is, 24 million or 4 million or $6 million, whatever it is that your body is worth on the New York Stock Exchange, there's that much money out there all over the world in fives and tens and hundreds with your Social Security number on it. So these numbers line up exactly correct the same way. The numbers can be in blue, black, or red. And so this is why years ago, we used to say the government is just going to beat you black and blue. Because black and blue are colors that are used in banking. You have to sign with a blue or black pen. Or you can sign with a red pen, which represents your blood. Your physical body is really very important to the corporation called the United States Corporation. That, again, is why they want you to wear your seat belt and have insurance. And in case something does happen to you, you need to have insurance. Why? Because the government doesn't want to pay for you to be in a hospital. They want you out making money for them. They don't have to put the money in to protect you in a hospital. Go get your own insurance. Let them pay for it. The real powers behind banking today in America is insurance companies. Insurance companies are the most powerful hand behind the world of money because it has something to do with the 14th Amendment and how we were changed over from sovereignty, man, woman, and child, into a U.S. citizen. During the 1870s, when the corporation was being born in the minds of the politicians here, when they realized the United States of America was no longer a viable entity because we are a lot of things, but united isn't one of them. So we're no longer a United States, but we're a corporation. And so therefore your body now becomes a security for that corporation and needs money. It's a big corporation and needs money coming in. So that's why they want you to stay safe and drive safe so that you can make money. They don't want to put money out on you. They need you to go out and make money for themselves. This changeover from being sovereign man, woman, and child sovereigns, which means you are your own law. But when we changed over from the United States of America into a corporation in 1870, and we became known to the world as the United States Corporation, not the United States of America. From 1870 to the First World War and then the Second World War, the United States corporation went broke, financing all these escapades around the world with wars and revolutions and paying other countries to be our friends and all that. So the corporation called United States went broke. So they had to go back to the old days, go back to the British banking cartels who can print money out of nothing and had the ability to finance anything they wanted to do. And so the corporation had to borrow money from the British bankers to keep this corporation going, because the corporation's broke. And you don't want to go broke when you got millions of people who want to eat tonight, and the company, the United States, no longer is operable because it's broke. So the United States went to the European banking system and asked for loans to give us some money, loan us some money so we can keep our corporation going. Well, the bankers there said, well, why would we do that? You are already broke. So why would we turn around and give you money when we know you're broke? So how are you going to pay us back if we did give you the money? And so the British bankers and the international bankers in Europe came up with a brilliant idea. We'll loan you the money on whatever it is you need. We'll give you a blank check and you can do whatever you want with it, and we'll loan you the money. But what we want is, we want your citizens as collateral. And so the idea was, we'll give you lots of money, but we want your daughter, okay? We want your son. We want your wife. And so today we are collateral for the money that was borrowed to keep the corporation going back in the 1870s to the First World War. And so today we still talk about how we have a national debt. We have to pay off this national debt. No one's ever asked the question, who are we paying off? Who are we in debt to? My God, I thought we were the most powerful country in the world, and we're the envy of the whole world, and yet we have a national debt. And so the politicians tell, no, what it is just that we owe ourselves. You know, we do a lot for you, and so we've spent a lot of money on you, building your bridges and all that kind of stuff we do. And so we just want to keep it in the house. So you need to pay us, your government. Yeah, but it's not your government. It represents the bankers of Europe and England. And there is a debt, and you will pay it, because the British bankers loaned us a lot of money to build our railroads and our airports and our highways and all kinds of things that we've been building America, and it's very impressive. Yeah, but you don't have any money. You went broke during the First World War. And so that's why we today are a collateral for the debt. We do have a national debt. And ultimately, at the bottom line is the Vatican. The Vatican is the ultimate bottom line on all of this dark dealings behind the scenes with bankers in Europe, wars and violence. The whole banking establishment is based on the Vatican canon law. It's a very big story about the history of the world. The 33rd President of the United States was Harry Truman. And Truman made an interesting statement. Somebody asked him, is there anything going on in history that we haven't been told? And he said, the only thing that's hidden in history are the facts of life that you don't know. How this country really was founded, and where the money really came from, and who you really are. That you don't know, well, that's the real hidden history of this country. All of this stuff that you think you understand, nobody really understands how this system works. It's based on your blood, it's based on your body, it's based on putting your children up as collateral for later bills. It's a remarkable story, and it brings into play the Pirates of the Caribbean, the Federal Reserve, International wars, like you used to many years ago, they used to say, war is good business. You should invest your son. It's just a business. Today we even have people called fight promoters. They put up the money and they organize the fight and they pick out who's going to fight who and they pay both sides. And the whole thing is a show. This is why during wartime, you'll hear the generals talking about the wars in the Pacific theater or the wars in the Atlantic theater. A theater is a word used in relation to a show. And that's why, because it is a show. And then you get into the esoteric symbols. On the dollar bill side with the pyramid has 13 layers. There are 13 layers in the pyramid. There are 72 stones in the pyramid. The pyramid has an all-seeing eye that's not touching the pyramid. Above it, it has the letters in Latin says Annuit Coeptus. Basically, Annuit Coeptus simply means our enterprise or our project now is a success. What project? What is it that's a project that's now a success? On the bottom, it says Novus Ordo Seclorum. Novus is a novice, meaning new. Ordo is order, and seclorum is secular, which means of the world. It's secular. It's a secular project, and it seems to be working. So our project is now a success. What? The new order of the world. When you hear people talk about the new world order, it's on the American